Everybody, I'm curious if you have ever seen a real life cocoa bean. I started taking cooking classes, and if you've been following me, hopefully you've been following a little bit of this journey. And I've been taking this class on chocolate, and it's been really cool. And they talked about where chocolate come from. And did you know that chocolate actually comes from a fruit? And the tree is grown in the tropical regions of Central South America, Asia, and Africa. So basically, wherever the equator is, basically where you can find the cacao trees, and you get what looked like big seeds or big cocoa pods, what they call them, and they look like gourds. The second step is once you open up those pods in the fields, they use a machete because they're hard and whatnot. You ferment the beans. So I have some beans in here fermenting. You just ferment them in the pulp. So you literally just take them out of the pod, put them in a bowl, and cover them for 5 to 7 days. This process, let me tell you, if you want to learn about patience, this is definitely one of those ways. And because this is a very long process, some of these beans have been sitting on my countertop, I want to say probably close to 2 weeks now. So you have the pod, you take the beans out, you ferment them in the pulp, and all the material is already in the pod. You put them in a bowl, cover them, let them ferment 5 to 7 days, and then you dry out the beans, which is what I have going on right here. So you let the beans basically dry out, and the color is going to get a little bit darker as well as they dry out. That moisture dries out. Once they are dried out, then you can start shelling them. We're here working on our chocolate beans. We are down to our very last two, so I'm going to show you guys what the shelling process looks like. When you're doing commercial chocolate, they have a machine where they shake the cocoa beans and separate the shells by a quick vibration that breaks apart the shell and the bean. But we're obviously, this is a home and we're doing homemade chocolate, so I'm going to show you how I've been doing it. I take a small knife, a paring knife, and I simply very carefully peel the shell. You've got to be cautious because the shell is very thin, as you guys can see there. And so you can easily grate the actual cocoa bean. And you don't want that, right? You want as much chocolate as you can. So you gotta be cautious. Or if you have long fingernails, you can very carefully peel the shell off with your fingers. These beans are fragile and break easily, especially if they're super dry. You want the dry beans. You don't want wet beans. So these beans have been drying for a couple of days. And so the shells, you're just simply going to peel off the shells, either with a knife or with your fingers. So if you can get a small peeler with a small blade, you could probably get it to work. I find that my dad has been helping me with this. So you're simply going to peel the shell off just like that. If you're lucky, it's just like peeling a peanut or a nut. You'll get a big chunk of the shell, and then I just place them in this bag. Here it's the very last bean, guys. Super exciting. This process is finally done. Now we get into the good stuff. Alright, so we're just going to carefully peel the shell. You want to get a good enough grip so that you have enough room for your fingernail to get in there. Now keep in mind that these beans are found in something called a cocoa pod, which is a fruit which grows on a tree in the regions of South America, Africa, and Asia. So basically any tropical areas around the equator. I believe about 7% of the cocoa trees are actually found in Africa. These beans are specifically from Puerto Rico. This is the very last bean that we're peeling, shelling away. And then after this process, once you get the cocoa pod, when you cut it open with a very sharp knife, inside you'll find almost like a spine with all the cocoa beans on. They're white, being roasted in a white pulp. You basically scoop out the cocoa pod, you cut them in a bowl, you let the beans ferment. So I have two different batches. This batch are the fermented ones. This batch is the non-fermented one. The difference I've seen so far is that these were a lot darker. So that fermentation process is where that cocoa flavor, that cocoa taste, the chocolate taste, and the chocolate flavor basically comes from. You ferment them. These were sitting for 5 days, fermented in the pulp that was on that time in a pod, in a bowl, in a warm place, covered with a towel. They have machines that will do this process for you. This is what the inside of a bean looks like, guys. Of a cocoa bean. So this is called the cocoa nib. This is the actual seed where you get chocolate from. So once you dry out the seeds, you shell the beans, then you're gonna roast them. Roasting can be complicated. You have to be cautious on how you roast them and how long you roast them. Roasting gives it a caramelized flavor. You will roast these on a low temperature in the oven for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours and so forth. And after you roast them, then you can start grinding them. And then you get a chocolate piece and you get the cocoa butter. Then you separate that and temper the chocolate. It's a very long process, at least 2-month process between everything. So we are still in the beginning stages of this, but I am so close to being done with shelling these beans. I've been doing this all week. Probably started this on Saturday or Sunday, shelling these. And so I do a little bit at a time because I'm doing it by hand. Here's all the shells. I did break a cocoa nib. These are very fragile, which I'm learning. Sometimes chefs in different restaurants will use the cocoa nib in recipes. If you ever heard of coffee rubbed steak, they will actually use the cocoa, break this, and use this as part of their seasoning. The cocoa nibs are used for recipes outside, not necessarily made for chocolate. They're not necessarily going to have that chocolate flavor. The chocolate flavor actually comes from the fermenting process. Because I forgot to ferment these, we're going to experiment with them and see what happens. Maybe they'll still be good because I feel like the pods were dried out when I did open them because I let them sit on my countertop. So maybe they fermented in the pod, which I'm hoping for. But if not, that's okay. We'll just have fun with it. And it's a great learning experience for the kids. And I have a much greater appreciation for chocolate and how it's made. The chocolates did not turn out as I was hoping. We tried the liquefying. John, I'm busy right now. In adding the sugar and milk, it became a thicker paste. So I'm just turning it into homemade double chocolate cookies with some chocolate chips. I added some flour and some egg. They're dry, but we'll see what happens. Here's to the rest of it.